Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, your home for heavy strategy, awesome theme, and everything in between. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 116. Should I Buy It? Part 2. Arkham Horror latest releases. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for continuing with us on this journey. We are doing this little mini series of episodes that I'm calling Should I Buy It? So there have been some pretty significant releases towards the end of the year that are of interest to our audience. So we are looking at them. We looked at Heroes of Terranoth last week. This week, it is Arkham. So we are going to look at Arkham Horror 3rd Edition in the first part of this episode. I have reached out to the Broken Meeple, Luke Hector. We break it down. Luke is a big fan of the Arkham series, a little bit bigger than I am. So, but we've gotten lots of plays in. We got some analysis for you. You know, it's just something more than just our opinions. You know, we really got down to brass tacks and answered some of the critical questions of whether this is worth your hard-earned cash. The second part of this episode, yes, there are two parts of this episode, is actually a continuation. Our friends at Co-opcast, always love working with those guys. Especially Michael Kelly, who is a huge Arkham Horror LCG fan. We wanted to do something a little bit different that not a lot of podcasts do, which is cover expansions. Arkham Horror LCG is going strong. Sales are super strong. The 4th cycle is about to release. Circle of Heroes, Circle of something or other. But we haven't covered the last couple of cycles. So over on Co-opcast, Michael and I, and also Roy Cannady, he was good enough to help us out, Roy from Epic Gaming Night. We're going to talk about the Dunwich Legacy of Arkham Horror LCG. And then we're going to come back here, the second half of this episode, and we're going to talk about the next cycle, which is Carcosa. So 2 cycles between Co-opcast and here, and also our conversation with Luke. Arkham, as I was saying before. So that's what you're going to get in this episode, and also on Co-opcast. So before we get to all that, we're going to throw it to Liz with the In Liz We Trust segment. Liz, what you got for us this week?
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here to encourage your Every Night is Game Night acquisition disorder. This week, I want to talk about Ragusa, designed by Fabio Lopiano. I did not give Ragusa a second thought, actually, until this weekend, when Jeremy Howard from Jambalaya Plays Games taught me to play it at PAX Unplugged. But I am so glad he did, because I really like this one. Ragusa is a Euro-style city builder, but it's not quite like any other game I've ever played. You place buildings and get resources, but there are a ton of fascinating mechanics that spice it up. Depending on where you place buildings, you can collect up to 3 different resources, as well as trigger opponent actions. Or you can enjoy the benefits when your opponents place buildings and inadvertently help you. There are also secret objectives that give you special goals in the game, and extra ways to score. I've not gotten to play games solo yet, but I spent some time checking out the solo AI cards, and what I see there is very promising. I'm going to back this one myself. If you want to check it out, make sure you do so before the campaign ends on December 15th. Happy gaming!
All right. Thank you so much, Liz. Was that a Cthulhu-themed game or some kind of game with horror and suspense and all that kind of thing? I don't know, but in Liz we trust. She hasn't let us down yet, so I'm sure that is another project that is worth a look. Thank you very much for the time, Liz. All right, let us get on to the meat of the episode. As I said at the beginning, we are going to be covering Arkham Horror 3rd Edition. Just came out last month at Gen Con, I think it was. People have been playing it and have a good time. So you can't really review this game without reviewing what came before. I mean, you have Arkham 2nd Edition, you have Arkham this, Arkham that, all over the place. So I put out the call on Twitter for an expert, someone who's played more Arkham than I have. You know, I enjoy Arkham just fine, but like there are people out there that really get into it. And my friend, who we've done a lot of projects together, lots more to come. This is the Broken Meeple, Luke Hector, friend of ENGN, is on the show to talk about all things Arkham. Welcome back to the show, Luke.
Sorry. I've already been taken over by Cthulhu.
So we're on a video call. He did the thing where he puts his hand in front of his mouth and does the little tentacle things.
I'm not sure. He's got very high pitched on your end.
Yes. So yeah, Luke is a big time Arkham fan. If you saw our top 100 co-ops or heard on the audio, we had a lot of Arkham on there, and most of that was Luke's responsibility. So I'm glad you're here to help us sort all this out.
That's right.
Okay. So yes, let's go right into a comparison with Arkham Second Edition, especially like really the critical question is if you have Second Edition or if you enjoyed it at all, is this something new? Like, is this a genuine third edition? Is it a totally different game? Is it not a different game? Like, we're going to parse all that out for you. But let's, just kind of give some background. So this is a Arkham third edition. The lead designer here was Nikki Valens, who's designed a lot for Fantasy Flight. I think she went, freelance at this point. So I don't know if we're going to get more from her in the Fantasy Flight universe, but this is kind of something that, I think she would participate in Eldratar. She'd, lots of stuff for them. Based on the designs of Richard Launius for the first edition and Kevin Wilson for the second edition. So in a nutshell, like this is Arkham, right? I think you'd agree, Luke. Like there's a certain vibe at this point when it comes to like one of these big adventure Arkham games. You're playing an investigator, you're on a big board, you're looking for clues, you're fighting off monsters, you have like 2 actions a turn, you're doing various stuff. You're doing investigations, and the investigations kind of like move the story forward. And 5 hours later, maybe you either win or you go insane and whatever it is. Really what you're in any Arkham game for is the kooky stuff that happens. So there's encounters and there's the Mythos thing, which is kind of like the grand global event. There's a lot that just, you see your reflection and, you creep out in horror, or you see this terrible monster, or you get lost in time and space, or you seal your doom with a pact with some eldritch power. And I mean, that's kind of what you're in any Arkham game. I think those are the kind of the basic elements, right?
Yeah, it still feels like Arkham, but what this is essentially trying to do is streamline it from second edition.
Yes.
Because second edition is one that I've had for a long time. It is a solid game, but everybody has to admit right now it is fairly clunky in its rules because it's got a lot of them. And because Fantasy Flight did what they always do with all their Arkham Horror games, which is expand them beyond recognition, it's got so much content in it that if you play with anything more than a couple of expansions, it just becomes a mammoth beast. But it was still always good fun to play, but as you say, yeah, you're talking a minimum of like 3 hours plus to finish any game. I mean, you do these as an event, like around Halloween or on a weekend night. This is not something you take to a game night and say, yep, okay, we're going to play second edition Arkham Horror. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, this is quote unquote the streamlined version. Like we can kind of argue about whether the third edition is actually, or like, especially in terms of its gameplay, streamlined. I wanted to break it down though. I broke it up into 3 parts, 3 aspects where we can analyze this, and we'll take each in turn. The gameplay part I'm going to leave for last because I think we'll have the most to say. But let's start with the first thing that you see. The first thing that gamers saw when the announcement was first made, which was the board of the new edition and, just kind of the general components. So in Arkham, I think the thing that links Arkham Second Edition or Third Edition is the fact that it's in Arkham. Like it's not this big adventure. It's not kind of going place to place to place. It's in one area. It's in like the one city of Arkham, or it's in the one museum or whatever it is. So in second edition, you had this giant board and you needed table space. I mean, if you didn't have a big table, then go ahead and go grab your TV trays and go have whatever you could to take all those cards and all the other stuff that was there. Smaller, much smaller here in Arkham third edition. And the way they pull that off is that they have this kind of, these 5, hexes?
They're kind of like weird hexagons. Just looking at the picture here, 5 hexagons, each one split into 3 segments, split by little street tiles, and it's basically like a jigsaw puzzle that you put together, and the amount you put down is dependent on player count, whereas in the past you had the whole board and it didn't matter how many players you had, I don't think. So it condenses it down. you still, in a sense, have the same amount of locations, but if you imagine that on the second edition board, it was one giant rectangle and all the locations were separated out in big lines. Here, because you got 3 per hex, you still have effectively, I mean, for a typical player game, you've got 5 hexes out, so 15 locations to go to. So you've still got plentiful places, but it does keep the table space a lot smaller.
Yeah, plus, the street spaces. So you have it, like, it feels smaller, but in reality, there's as many spaces. And we could talk a little bit about the geometry of it. I'm just going to say it. Like, a lot of people are really critical of this because it makes it look like a space station, like Space Station Arkham, or, like this has this kind of sheen to it. I got to agree with them. This board is ugly, dude. I mean, I'm sorry.
It's something that I'm not used to, I'll admit, because they're so used to seeing this grandiose board. But I think the whole space station vibe is just because they've seen a lot of games come out where this is used as a space station style setup board. So I think it's kind of, they've been, what's the word? Not biased towards it, but I think they've just kind of like been brainwashed into that way of thinking. Like, this is what you use for a Space Station 1. But in some ways, it does feel a little bit more like an actual city, because you imagine like the rectangle board, you kind of sort of think, right, well, I've got to get all the way from the top to the other end. Nothing loops around. You can't sort of circle the places. It's just a rectangle map. At least with this, it feels more like what a city probably would. If you could go from Rivertown towards the Merchant District to the left or something, but then you could go up to downtown above, and then straight down from that back to the Merchant District as well. So it just feels a bit more like it's not 3D, but you know what I mean, a full, complete city. And the artwork does help with this a lot, because the other second edition only had this sort of yellow, archaic sort of covering all over it. The only location pictures you ever saw were in tiny little windows, which is all well and good, but it left a bit to the imagination. Here, all the hexes, every single part of it is one giant sort of portrait or landscape picture on each of the hexes. And I gotta say, the artwork, I feel, has been turned up a notch here, because it looks gorgeous art-wise.
A little dark for me, but I see your thing about the actual art pieces themselves. Like, okay, so I don't know, are you from London, or you spend some time in London?
I've been to London every now and again.
It's a big, sprawling, messy city. It's a mess. And I'm from New York City. New York City is a mess. Like, there's grid systems and everything, but like, if you want to find this area, it's very kind of jumbled and chaotic. And this one, everything is so neatly laid out. It feels so clinical. Like, I guess that's where the space station comes from. Like, this feels like a very clinical board where, you can go 2 spaces and there's this many options. And it's almost like a scientist came up with this board as opposed to a person who plays games. I don't know. Like, it's funny to be like so critical off the bat, but like, it's the first thing you see. And I know a lot of gamers are going to look at it and go, oh. So I'm actually fascinated that you appreciated it more than I did, but I just thought, and plus like the fact that it's modular. Yeah, I get it from a gameplay perspective. You want more modularity, but like, it's a city, so in a city is the blacksmith is here and then the florist is there. And then like, all I do is like go 3 days later and then they're switch positions. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm down. So in terms of like the 3 categories, this part, I'm going to say Arkham 3rd edition, thumbs down.
There's bits and pros and cons to each. I mean, I can't really say which one I like better out of the 2. You've got a giant board, with all the different locations, but most of it was just, let's have a look at this board again. Yeah, you got like the street map in the background, but then it was basically a bunch of names with green lines sort of connecting them, all the gates down one side, and a little bit of text underneath each one, because you had to read a ton of text in the old one just as much. At least the other one gives me a nice picture to look at. And yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it does look a bit clinical from the sake of, right, everything's kind of organized in this modular fashion. But I think that's just kind of the way a lot of games are done these days. Modular is the next thing forward, because at the end of the day, I would rather that the locations were switched around every now and again. I mean, it's not like you're playing campaign mode, where your first play of this, you've got the map set up like this, and then you're technically continuing a campaign. It's like, well, no, it's a separate game.
Well, that's what the LCG is for, right, my man?
Yeah, that's true. I still love that one. That is still the favorite.
Nice. Okay, so this one is a thumbs down for me. So let's go to the part that's actually a thumbs up. You open the box. And you start to set up the game, and I wanted to just take a little bit of time to talk about the investigators. So Luke mentioned it, like, this is a quote unquote streamlined, modernized version of Arkham Horror. It says so right in the description. This is why this exists. This is a modernized, streamlined version. I think modernized is the word they used. So where I have quibbles with the board, I think the investigators definitely reflect advances in the game experience. So in Arkham Second Edition, there wasn't, the characters weren't very exciting. You kind of are all the same, except, your health and your sanity might have changed. You kind of started all the same, but then you got items and you got different power-ups that made you different. Here, they do a lot. They do a lot. So you start off with, depending on your character, you start off with certain items, just like personal items, which gets you a little bit more differentiated right away. And you have a choice of those, which is a neat little thing. And then they do this little mechanism thing where you have your stats, and you could take an action called the focus action, which buffs your stat. So you get a little token, and you can either keep the buff, or when because there's a lot of rolling. I mean, welcome to Arkham Horror. You're going to roll your face off. Mm-hmm. You can actually use that buff to roll again, to get a reroll and get what you need. Like, that is so subtle and so cool. Like, I mean, that is not what happens in Arkham Second Edition. In Arkham Second Edition, if you wanted mitigation, you rolled more dice.
Yeah, you had
basically it.
You could buff up some skills, but you had the little sliders which upped and down certain skills depending on what you were doing or whether you got injured. But you did start off relatively similar to each other. You only had some minor differentiation. But this one, from like the first game I played of it, you can tell that a lot of this third edition, yes, they are streamlining the second one, but they have definitely borrowed from Eldritch Horror and the LCG a lot, right, with the rules and the layout, because these investigator sheets look like something out of Eldritch Horror, right down to the 5 stats being exactly the same. And even the concept of focusing is something from Eldritch Horror, but not necessarily to buff your skills easily, because normally you had to do some encounter to buff. Now you just literally say, I'm going to buff law, which is great, because sometimes you might have that time when you grab a couple of items, they're spells, and you generally don't do that. And it's like, well, I can focus a bit of law. Fair enough. Now I can actually be competent. And I did like these starting items and that, because you don't even use them all. You can cherry pick each time, because I think you only pick like 1 or 2 out of 3 types. 2 out of 3. Yeah,
for a lot of them.
I'd like them to put a few more in just for variety's sake, but it's nice that you actually have a choice. And I can't remember the mobster's name, but he was the first one I played, and it kind of had a choice of, he already came with a giant Tommy gun, and then I think he had something like a talent skill or a giant vehicle, and it's like, well, which one do you think I'm going to pick? I'm going to pick the giant car, and I spent the whole game running over cultists, which is totally what you want to do in Arkham. It's like, is he chanting, run him down?
I will definitely get to what you were talking about, like in terms of like, I'm just going to get in a car and mow them down in the gameplay version, just to kind of talk a little bit more about the investigators. Like in Arkham Second Edition, I mean, you didn't have a lot. Like so in terms of the feel, like Arkham Second Edition has this big reputation for being just a random fest, and not a lot of control on the board, not a lot of like the ways that you could do to kind of control what goes on the board. And that a lot of that is because the investigators they start off so puny, and you have the focus sliders, and speaking of fiddly bits, that's the other rap that Arkham Second Edition gets, fiddly. And those focus sliders are kind of like the emblematic of how fiddly it is. It is kind of like weird to manage. Here, it's all cleaned up. They've had game after game after game after game to kind of get this right, and I feel like this is probably, I don't know if it's the best yet in terms of the investigators, but it's definitely really, really, really cool.
I think the only way you can make it any better is go into the LCG or something, because, I mean, these are even a slight improvement on Eldritch Horror because of the fact you can buff your skills. The sliders didn't make a lot of sense from the previous one, because you ended up... It was weird. You slide it up the sheet, and it made something like your speed higher, but it made your sneak worse. Okay, fair enough, I can sort of get that. But then you had other ones where it's like, your fight is higher, but your will is lower. And it's like, well, how are those two even related? And lore and luck. It's kind of like, why do I have to make a skill rubbish to make another skill better? Why can't I just get better?
Yep, absolutely right. So, and the better you make yourself at one thing, it gimped you in the other thing. So heaven forbid you had to, actually do a check in that worst thing, like you have to close a gate or something. And that again, I Actually, you know what? So it's I think thumbs up, right? Thumbs up on, at least the game, the investigator side and like your player abilities. So I have one thumb down. I have one thumb up. So let's get to like the kind of granddaddy, which is the main event. So when we coordinated on email about this episode, Luke, you mentioned before that Arkham Second Edition has a sense of horror to it. And I didn't know what you meant. I mean, I kind of know what you meant, but I just wanted to help you or invite you to elaborate on how the second edition kind of generates that sense of horror and how the third edition kind of compares to that.
It's one thing to note that when I say horror, I don't mean like when you play this game, you're going to have nightmares or it's going to like jump scare you from time to time. But
Right.
You get like some games where people will play these around Halloween or something. And it was always, when it came to the Cthulhu ones, it tended to be Arkham Horror Second Edition or Mansions of Madness that got played. You never necessarily saw Eldritch Horror being played because Eldritch Horror doesn't feel much like this is a horror story being told. It feels more like this is Indiana Jones with some weird mystical stuff thrown in, which is still fun.
Right.
But it, like I say, it doesn't. I think expanding the scale out to the world or something made it a little less on the horrific side. The thing I always remember though, because Arkham Horror was one of my first big games I started playing, was just the imagery on a lot of the Ancient One lists or some of the stories you got in the encounter cards or even just like the feel of the board and that itself. There was just something very innately creepy about it. I mean, you look at the ones these days and an Ancient One may literally just be a picture of the Ancient One. It's like, okay, that's pretty cool. Looks awesome, but not going to worry too much. Whereas I remember two Ancient Ones specifically in the old version. I remember one being, it looked like this giant head at the end in this pit, and it's got a picture of it basically opening its mouth and two cultists throwing in a lady into it. It's like okay, pretty dark. And then I remember another one, what was she called? Queen of something. It was a Plateau of Leng or something. They're basically like Spiderville or something, as far as I call it. And being arachnophobic, she ended up being like probably the worst Ancient One I had to face. But her face basically looks like the Scream painting, that sort of thing. That kind of face, but on spindly legs or like almost spider-like creature. And it's just like, yeah, if I saw that creature, I'd be like making bricks. Whereas if I look at anything now, I don't feel that bit. Maybe it's just because I've gotten used to, like, desanitized on the whole Arkham Horror thing. But there's just something about the second edition that I just thought, even though it was clunky, yes, even though it didn't flow smoothly, the story and the atmosphere just sort of came out with that one.
Right. I think I get what you're saying. I mean, first of all, the art stuff is a real thing. I mean, you're not going to get two cultists throw a lady into the maw of a beast. Nowadays you're going to have the PC police kind of saying, no, it'll be, there's certain things that are kind of have been sanitized out of the art, which, you can go either way with that. It's just kind of like, it's there. I mean, there's definitely a difference. It definitely affects the vibe and it kind of lessens that sense of horror. The second thing is, so it's kind of the flip side of what we were talking about with the investigators. Like in the investigators in Arkham 3rd edition, you can do a lot. Like, you can kind of affect your fate a lot. There's items, there's rerolls, there's focus tokens and all this kind of stuff. We had a guy named Danny Lott. He designed a game called Coma Ward and he defined horror for us on the show. He said, horror is the movie, is your main character in the movie and you have a gun, but it doesn't work. And you're surrounded by monsters.
Yeah.
If you're in an action movie or suspense movie, the gun works. So like the fact that they took so much care to give you so many options and things to do, actually, make you feel more powerful, which is a different play experience. But it's not horror. And if you want horror, then you're gonna have to live with giant randomness and not being able to do stuff on a turn and being kind of, way behind the 8 ball and big swings and all kind of stuff. Like it has to be messy. It has to be messy. That's part of the deal. So you're just not going to get that in a quote unquote modernized, streamlined version. So I guess, in the translation, by making it modernized, it might have lost something really important about what made the second edition game so good. Mm.
Well, it's the difference between, I mean, I like that analogy actually with the gun, but if I was to put it into movie terms, it's the difference between watching Alien and then watching Aliens, those two films, because both are classics. But if someone's going to ask me what's my favorite horror film of all time, I'm going to say Alien, because that is claustrophobic. You're on a ship. You have pretty much no guns whatsoever. You don't know what the thing is. It's dark as anything. Half your crew wants to axe you off anyway, so you already feel quite helpless, and you've still got this killing machine going around. Switch it then to aliens, which is still okay. These are big creatures trying to kill you, but then you have a squad of Marines armed with big guns,
right.
and even you end up with your big gun in flamethrower and stuff like that. So even when the Queen appears, it's like, I've still got a big gun in the flamethrower, and then I've got a big art loader. So it's like, it's
right.
cool as all get out, but this is kind of different. Saying that Arkham Horror 2nd Edition is Alien, the horror film, whereas the 3rd edition is more Aliens, the action, the action film. And same with Eldritch, and the LCG is kind of in between.
This is an action movie of a board game. I mean, to the point where, like, we've talked about the board being so different and the investigators being so different, and now we're talking about kind of the vibe. And we're not going to get into all the mechanics. There's like, they changed the way you open and close gates, and they changed the way you investigate clues and stuff. But I guess the take-home message of that is that they've changed so much that I think the only thing that's the same is the fact that it occurs in Arkham. And that's what makes it Arkham 3rd Edition. And I don't know, like, people say, okay, if I have the 2nd, do I want to pick up the 3rd? It's a whole different game. I would say it's a whole different game. What do you think?
It's kind of the way I've gone. I've got the review of it coming out this week, actually, and it's such a hard choice because there's a lot of nostalgia I have for the 2nd edition one because it's in that vault, and it's, I can't sell it off because there's no boxes for it anymore. It's like, it's there. Right. But the 3rd edition is the one that I'm going to get to the table more because it can be long, but it is possible to shorten it a bit, and you can still solo it in relatively quick time. But it is just the fact that I can teach this and get it done in a game night is going to get it to the table more often, which is definitely going to boost it a lot. And it has significantly changed mechanically from the 2nd edition. I think that if you've got the 2nd edition and you love it, you could still get the 3rd edition and have them as two separate games. Yes. But Arkham Horror to me is not about mechanics. If you want mechanics, you go play a Euro game. You go play something by Alex Pfister or something, if you want just nothing but mechanics. But Arkham Horror, the mechanics are just there to keep the game going. When you say vibe, that's what Arkham Horror is. It's that atmosphere and theme that you get from it. Yeah, there's randomness and you're going to be dice chucking, but you're living a horror story. There's a reason the LCG gets so much buzz at the moment, because when you play that, it is such a good narrative game. Even if you don't like deck building or certain bits like that, but my god, does it tell a good narrative. Yeah. And Arkham Horror, any Arkham Horror game you should play should be a thematic experience, which is why when you get these dry Euro versions of Arkham Horror games, cough cough, Study an Emerald, it drives me nuts.
Oh man, you went back to the vault for that one, Study an Emerald. I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah, not since the 2nd edition. Well, I'm not a fan of that, but you got other ones like Witch of Salem and a couple of other sort of Arkham ones which are more Euralized. And it's like, no, this isn't a game that wants to be Euralized. This is one that wants, because I think if any other publisher tried to do Arkham Horror, it would fail. I think you need someone like Fantasy Flight, which is mostly about theme rather than mechanics. That's kind of their shtick, or the way that they tend to be anyway.
Right. Yeah, the dice fooling of everything, all the other stuff. If you're Fantasy Flight, you're talking dice. Okay, so then actually, mechanics-wise, there is one thing I did want to note that actually kind of brings home the distinction between Arkham 2nd and Arkham 3rd Edition. So it's the way that the scenario plays out. So in Arkham 2nd Edition, it's basically one scenario, but there's different old ones, and the old ones, or the gods, or whatever it is, the enemy, will kind of put in a global effect that changes things. So, it might, encourage monsters, or it might, open more gates or whatever. But it's basically, you're doing the same thing, and your Mythos deck and your counter decks are basically giant decks of cards. And whenever you get expansion, just like dump more cards in there, which means you're going to have like wild experiences, and the story kind of emerges from all the stuff that you do. So like when you play a game of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, it's going to be like, you do a bunch of stuff, happens, and then a story emerges from the end of it. So it's like, remember when you did this? Remember when you fell down the hole? Remember when you saw that, that spider coming out of you, and Luke jumped out of his chair and ran into the bathroom and all that good stuff.
I feel some of that was invented.
In Arkham 3rd Edition, they do a lot more to tell a kind of a coherent story. So you have your initial quest, like your initial scenario, so everything's scenario based. and you kind of have a general idea of what's going on, but you don't know really what to do in terms of the main goal. They keep that kind of open-ended. So you basically, it's an Arkham game, so you're going to be investigating clues, and there's clues in different parts of the board. Once you investigate those clues and you move forward the story, you actually add cards to what they call a codex, and they tell more of the story. And then you have other kind of cards that seed into the different character decks. So then to kind of unfold the story a little bit more piece by piece by piece. The upshot of that is it isn't like an open sandbox at all. Like, I mean, the Arkham game or the Eldritch game is way more sandboxy. Here, you're going to go from story beat to story beat to story beat. Kind of like the Fallout game. I don't know if you played Fallout from Fantasy Flight.
Friends of mine have. I haven't, but I get the gist of what you mean.
It's very much they took whatever was done in that game and they put a lot of it into this game where, you have your story cards and they get seeded into the top two of the encounter deck. So you're going to be able to kind of move the story forward, but because of the way it's kind of structured a little bit, it really puts you on it shoots you through. Like you have to do this part of the story now. It's not like you have a whole bunch of turns where in previous games you can kind of pick your direction a little bit. Like there was time pressure, but you didn't have to go, you didn't have to go one way. You can kind of a little more open-ended. Here you kind of have to okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, and then when I finish this, I'm going to read this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. It felt like a really propulsive kind of pulp action narrative, which I don't know, man. I don't know how I felt about that. Maybe that is the modernized streamlined thing of it, but it didn't feel like Arkham to me. But I don't know what you thought about that.
Well, the Arkham Second Edition had this thing with the encounters because they were cool, they were atmospheric, and they were horrific, and they were my favorite part of the game. But they were quite random because you had the Ancient One, and you generally had to close gates, and you had to kill monsters. But other than that, I think you might have differentiated the monsters, but I think it was mainly that each Ancient One pretty much just had a special rule on the game.
Right. Yeah,
so the encounters happened. Right? Yeah, so the encounters were more randomized. You might be dealing with, Cthulhu, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with Yog Sothoth's goat cultists or whatever, down in the woods, and it's well, hang on, that's not even relevant. So it's that's a totally different area of Arkham. And
there's a spaceman over here. It's where'd that spaceman come from?
Yeah, it's to say you got the Yog Sothoth bit there, and then suddenly it's oh, now we're in time and space. Hang on a minute. It's very much more randomized. Whereas ever since Aldridge and the LCG and all that lot, you have got that more cohesive story because now the scenario plays out still reminding you, you are actually trying to stop the arrival of Azeroth here, which is why you suddenly have a bunch of cultists and no deep ones, for example. Why your codex is telling you to, investigate these areas. Oh, now there's a big portal in the sky. Right now, go seal it. It's not just suddenly inserting random bits of the Arkham lore, which is not necessarily a modernization thing. I think that's just a general criticism of Second Edition. That just got fixed, in the sense, because at the end of the day, movies have to do the same thing. They've got to tell a story from beginning to end. Well,
I guess I'll actually push back against that a little bit because, it's the weirdness, it's the crunchiness that kind of makes a cool story emerge after the fact. It's very unique. I feel like I'm playing in this game. I feel like I'm playing someone else's story. Did you watch? You're a video gamer, right?
Now and again.
Mass Effect, the Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3.
I didn't play them, but I have seen a lot of clips and reviews and stuff like that of them. But yeah, I know Mass Effect was heralded for having this really good story for the majority of it. And I remember news articles where fans got completely annoyed and just uproared over what was it, Mass Effect 3 ending? Yeah,
the Mass Effect 3 ending. So it was all this branching story. You can kind of have different experiences. In one story, this guy dies. Another story, this guy lives. But then at the end of it, it was the same exact ending, no matter what you did, no matter what you did. It was the exact same ending with a different color explosion. And that was their nod to okay, things happening differently. And it's what is happening? I kind of got that feeling from Arkham where, if I'm playing, beat to be beat, actually, I'll only put a pin in that by saying there are choices. So like if let's say you're that first part of the story and either you accomplish whatever it says or you don't, you actually branch. So the path branches a little bit. But even then, like, I'm branching in a certain area. Like I can go here and then here and here. And I can kind of fork a little bit, but it's not truly open. So again, that is not a bad thing or a good thing. I think at the end of the day, this is a different game. Like it's not a better game or a worse game. It's a very different game. It's more propulsive. It's more, action pulpy oriented than some of the more open-ended stuff. To me, I don't prefer it. I like Eldritch. I love Eldritch. And we haven't really talked about Eldritch. Eldritch is kind of my great Arkham game. I love the world stuff. I love the open world end of it. I love the fact that the encounters are kind of like you can have an encounter in Rome, you can have an encounter in the Himalayas or whatever. That matters to me. The expansion add a little sideboard, so kind of like it's even more open-ended. Arkham 3rd edition felt very constrained, even with the pathing story. They determine the paths for you. So I can have two paths, but if it's two choices that you're giving me, I still feel a little bit constrained. So Eldritch gave me that open-ended kind of like anything can happen type vibe. And I have all the stuff for it. I'm not getting rid of it. So Eldritch is going to be my big Arkham game of choice. Where do you land on that, Luke? What's your big Arkham game of choice?
At the moment, still, Eldritch started off as being my big game of choice, but again, it's going down the way of 2nd edition Arkham Horror, where it's just getting too bloated for its own good.
Right.
I've still got it. I've still got everything for it, and I still enjoy it when I bring it out, but I suppose it's with that one I have to accept that I'm not really there for necessarily any encounters. It's more that this is an adventure game with some Arkham bits thrown in. I still like 2nd and 3rd edition of Arkham Horror, and to have the encounters and have that little bit of focus. You can have a little bit of branching paths, but it's nice to have a bit of structure. For me, though, my two go-to games are Mansions of Madness 2nd edition and Arkham Horror LCG at the moment. The LCG as probably the current favorite, just being yes, okay. Well, you get some branching narrative because depending on how you end each scenario will dictate certain elements that come through the campaign. Like, did you lose this? You had a sidekick. Did he die or did he turn against you? Well, that's going to have an effect later on. So you do get some branching paths there. And again, you can get an LCG game done in an hour. So it's nice and quick and solid. Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, a lot longer. But that gives me the whole... But then that horror element that I miss out of Arkham Horror 2nd edition is not in Eldritch, it's in Mansions of Madness, because you've got the app, you've got the ambient music, it's got all the different encounters and the horror effects that turn up, and you're playing it almost a bit like a dungeon crawl, not entirely, but it's, you start off in a room or like in a hotel, and then suddenly you move out, and then, you're on the Arkham streets now, and then you go into other buildings, and you find the curiosity shop, and then the plot unfolds. Granted, there's only so much variation you'll get from a repeat play. So, yeah, I get it. Eldritch Horror can be very different. But then I suppose that's just mainly due to what encounter cards you pick up, which is no different from any other Arkham game.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in terms of, wrapping this up, I think Arkham 3rd edition is definitely the most action-oriented of the Arkhams. I see why they call it Arkham 3rd edition, mostly for sales, I suppose. It's kind of unfortunate because it creates that question that I don't think needs to be there. This is such a different game. It's so much more kind of aggressive and streamlined, and it tells like that kind of coherent, propulsive story. There's so many other games in this universe and they're all kind of clustered together, but I think this is one distinct enough to kind of have its own life. And if you like that stuff, then go for it, man. If you like Luke was saying, this is probably the easiest of the board games to get to the table. You're likely, it'll take some time. Like it'll take you 2 or 3 hours, especially setup. The setup on this thing is a beast. Oh my God.
You got to get used to that part, but once that's in your head, it's not too bad. But this is closer to Arkham Horror than it is the other ones, because it's that same plot. You're in Arkham. Here's your ancient one. Here's the gates. Here's the the monsters and that. So it does feel different enough that it does not replace 2nd edition Arkham Horror for the fans out there.
Right.
But I don't think I would have called this any other game. I wouldn't have sort of done the Eldritch Horror thing and gone, bro, this is Arkham Horror, this is Eldritch Horror, and this is, I don't know, insert name here. I'm trying to think of something funny and I can't, but Quartermaster Arkham, I don't know. is a Quartermaster General Arkham edition. It's not like that. So yeah, I'm happy that it went third edition. It's just not every time somebody puts out a second, third edition do you have to replace the original one. Because sometimes they are completely different.
Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it is. Like there's sometimes where a second edition will just wipe out. Like I'm looking back here at Darkest Night second edition. Darkest Night second edition wipes out first. Just throw your first edition stuff away, as far as I'm concerned.
Mission Red Planet is a similar one. Yeah, once they brought out the second edition reprint, it's like, yep, you don't need the first one.
Yep, this is not that. This is a completely different game. I think there are certain people that are going to appeal to this. I'm keeping my Eldritch stuff. I'm probably not going to go into Arkham 3rd Edition. I know Eldritch is probably done with its cycle, but it's enough. I have content for years.
We've got enough. I would like them to stop Eldritch, because we have.
I think enough. They might. I think they might.
We don't need more Eldritch. I've got plenty enough Mansions of Madness stuff, and we've just had another expansion out. So I mean, you can keep that going for a bit. Keep the LCG going. I'm more than happy.
Right.
As much as the first part of the intro to my Arkham third edition video is me with the violin music in the background looking over second edition rule books and that, because it's such a hard decision. If someone says, right, are you now no longer going to play second edition? It's like, I've got such that nostalgic connection to second edition, but I have to be realistic and think that when am I ever going to get a chance to play it? It's just such a behemoth game, and I'd have to relearn all the rules. At least with this third edition, which is, it's on that shelf above Scythe, I can say, if I can't play second edition, third edition is good enough for me, because the other two I play solo anyway. Right. This one's the kind of one that I can go, you know what, if I've got 3 or 4 people who want to play this, I can at least bring this one out, because I'm not going to have 3 or 4 people playing my LCG or the Mansions of Madness one there.
All right, so that does it for the Arkham 3rd Edition. I think that you guys have a sense of, if you want to buy it, if you should buy it, that is most of what you need to know. Go ahead and check out Luke's video. He's going to have him staring wistfully at rule books, and he's going to be able to have little graphics and everything. And he'll give you kind of some of the thoughts that he has as well. Stay tuned here. We are going to get into Arkham LCG, the 2 expansions. Luke, thank you very much for joining me and helping me out with this little review here.
Yeah, no worries. Hell, I'll join you for the other ones if need be, but now I just have to do.
Those are already in the can, man. I got some other people over there. We'll be joined by Roy Cannady and Mike Kelly from Co-op Cast. So go ahead and stay tuned for that.
Fair enough.
Hey everybody, I am back. You just heard me and Luke Hector break down Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, but that is not where we're going to stop with the Arkham craziness. If you go over to Co-op Cast, we have talked about that podcast a lot. There are basically a sister podcast at this point. Love those guys over there.
We're closely related.
I mean, kissing cousins over here, baby.
Yeah, oh God. You made it weird, man. You made it weird.
If you go over to Co-op Cast, you will hear the first part of our conversation about Arkham LCG. We thought it would be fun to not just cover the base game, but to continue the story and talk about the further expansions of it. So you will hear about the Dunwich Legacy over on that podcast. Here, we're going to talk about the Path to Carcosa, which is a concept, at least, that should be familiar to anybody who has played an Arkham game. Carcosa always pops up. Signs of Carcosa, this of Carcosa. So the LCG version of that is the cycle is finished. Michael has played it. And we also are joined by Roy Cannady from Epic Gaming Night. Hey, Roy.
Hey, how's it going?
Fellow Dice Tower person, Favorite Game Fridays, Epic Gaming Night podcast. You are an OG in the space, sir. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, I try. Super stoked to be here.
And I don't know if we said, I am Mike from Co-op Cast, and I'm also on One Stop Co-op Shop with Colin doing playthroughs, and I also do video reviews over there.
That is not Peter. I made the gaffe of calling him Peter in the last episode. I'll probably do that again, so I'm going to check myself. Mike.
Peter and I design games together, so we're basically one person a lot of the time.
That's right. So we are going to get into the second expansion cycle, which is the Path of Carcosa. Mike has played through the entire Path of Carcosa scenario because he's a beast. He's just going to buy all the stuff.
Yeah, I think I played through Carcosa 3 times the full cycle.
Holy smokes.
And Roy has played a little bit of the you've played at least what the base.
I played the base
content?
box, like the deluxe box or whatever, the starter box, however they phrase it in this game, and then the first 2 Mythos packs.
That's halfway through. You got a good taste of it.
Yeah.
So then what we're going to do is we're going to break down in a non-spoiler, what is cool about the different expansions. So, an LCG, as opposed to maybe a base game experience where it's like, the base game is kind of the coolness of it, and then the expansions kind of add flavor. In an LCG, you may get like really great kind of game opening content just in the expansion stuff because they're just kind of like, they're doing it and they get better and better and better at it. Both Roy and Peter shared a bunch of really cool things that got me really excited to check out with Dunwich. Let's see if Carcosa promises to add some more stuff that might entice you to jump on the cycle finally. So, Mike, you have 3 things that you wanted to share with Carcosa. I bet Roy is going to be bouncing off of you and vibing and doing all that good stuff.
Yeah. All right, so the first thing, unlike Dunwich, if you go over and listen to Co-op Cast, I kind of had 3 all positives because I love that cycle. Carcosa has a few negatives. I will say it's still a great cycle. Definitely jump into it, but I would start with Dunwich and not start with Carcosa if I'm buying them. So the first thing that was really great about Carcosa, and this is if you're a more advanced player, Carcosa has really complex characters. Specifically, You've got Lola, who's the actress, and she is a unique thing in the Arkham Horror LCG in that she can have cards of all 5 classes. So she is like a deck-building nightmare if you're new to the game, but she is the craziest person to build for if you're kind of more advanced. And she has this mechanic where basically she like switches what her class is every turn. She's like playing different roles as an actress. Not quite as complicated, but sort of in the same vein. You have Safina, the painter, who starts with a crud ton of cards in her hand, and she like can put events in under her card, and then she has these other cards that let her like copy and reuse events that are under her card. So she's got a lot more management than other characters do, but can do some really cool tricks there. And then even like the more regular characters like Yorick the Gravedigger, his whole thing is that he wants to discard items because then he can pull them right back out and use them again. So these cards that might have been kind of not that worthwhile in previous expansions, like the knife from the base set, suddenly become really, really cool because he can use them for their advanced power and then just pull them right back out, like dig them up again out of the trash. So that's my first thing for Carcosa. Like, it kind of expands the wackiness you can do with characters and is a sign of, I'm sure, them doing more and more with that as the game continues. But again, not great for beginning players. That's Dunwich Legacy. But good for people who want to have, like, more to play with in the game.
So, Roy, you were saying when we talked about Dunwich about how you appreciated how streamlined the deck building was.
Yeah.
And so what do you think about that concept? Like, do you feel like, a concept that really blows open the deck building part of it? Is that something that's going to appeal to you? Or like, does that almost get in the way of some of the narrative stuff that's going on?
I think it's cool because the game can be flexible. You can either play, because I was playing a character through all of Dunwich that had 2 different classes. So I was always going back and forth looking in between these 2 different classes and seeing which cards I wanted to put on my deck. The Dunwich cycle itself has like the 1 class character, so you're only looking through 1. This adds it where you're like looking at weird, unique stuff because you're getting stuff out of the discard pile. You're playing something with all the stuff. It's cool that like if you want to play something a little bit more casual, you can play a character that's going to be more straightforward. Or if you're like in depth and have played through this scenario 4 times, then you can
4 times.
then you can like grab one of these characters that can just do any card in the game, and you can be like this hardcore, like super in depth, like I'm not playing this casually anymore just for fun to see the story. I'm playing this to see how I can min-max everything and like see how all the cards in the entire game work. So it allows you to like scale all the way up to like, this is my lifestyle game, which I feel like someone on this podcast, it might be.
Yeah. I think I might be there.
That's a really, you know what, Roy? That's a really great point in terms of like we hadn't mentioned that word yet, the lifestyle game. I think you need that plasticity of a super simple entry point, but also has to be rewarding for like the big, the min-maxer as well. So I think it sounds like Carcosa is going to be the expansion that kind of rounds that out. Is that a good way to think about it, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, again, I would start with the core game, make sure you like it, then go full in with Dunwich. And then if you really still love the game, I would say it's a toss-up. Forgotten Age or Carcosa both expand kind of what you can do with the game a lot. And they're both a lot tougher, whereas Dunwich is generally an easier cycle. So, either or is good, whichever theme appeals to you. Forgotten Age is more like Indiana Jones, and Carcosa is more kind of Lovecraftian horror, like Insanity kind of theme.
Right. All right. So what is your second thing of note when it comes to the Carcosa expansion cycle?
So my second one is a negative. And if you listen to our Dunwich conversation on the other podcast, you'll know that Roy was talking a lot about how like your choices matter and you get to make like different choices and change how things work. You have that here as well, but the choices feel less impactful. And like kind of the big thing they introduced for this cycle is the doubt and conviction scales. And basically some choices you make will like make you more doubtful, like you don't believe in the supernatural. And some will make you more convicted, like you do think that all this stuff is real. But it's really obvious which choice leads where. And all it really becomes is like, hey, use this card if you have more doubt, use this card if you have more conviction. It's not that exciting. I do feel like Dunwich has more variety in how the scenarios play out, whereas Carcosa just feels like there's an A and a B, and that's it. And also because you don't have like the characters. Like Carcosa is very focused on you and your own sanity, which is fine. Like I get that's what they're going for, but because you don't have these other characters to care about, I lost some of the stakes in it as well. So I did feel like kind of the variety in the cycle and just like the feeling of being in the narrative. It was different, but not quite as satisfying as with Dunwich Legacy.
Have you guys played Legacy of Dragonholt?
Yes. Yeah. I played pretty much the whole thing of that.
Yeah, I haven't played it, but a lot of people in my game group played, so...
Mm-hmm. Like there's a thing in Legacy of Dragonholt is like you have a bunch of stats and but whatever you have trainings, you could train a bunch of stuff. I'm a carpenter, I'm a this, I'm a that, and if you can encounter a choice and it gives you a certain thing that you can do, but then if you're trained in this, then do this, and that if you're trained in this option is usually better. In fact, it's pretty much always better.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you take that choice, so it's like you have choice. But it's kind of a magician's choice. It's like it doesn't, if you just follow what the game gives you and you happen to have the good thing, then you just happen to do it. So I found like, even though that story was open-ended in theory, I found that a lot of it kind of like disappeared because of that, the way the skill training and the way that all that stuff works. It sounds a little, when I was hearing you talk, Mike, it sounded like the doubt and conviction stuff kind of directed choices way more than it should have in that same way that Legacy of Dragonholt does.
Yeah, no, it's similar. It reminds me, if either of you are like video game players, Telltale Games that has done like the Walking Dead like story game and Batman story game and a lot of other stuff.
R.I.P. Telltale. Boo.
Yeah. I love those games for a while, but they give the illusion of choice. And whereas I think Dunwich did have actual choices that had like major effects, Carcosa has mechanical effects. But I feel like I'm basically having the same story happen to me either way, whereas Dunwich felt a little bit more different. So yeah, it's a little bit more illusion of choice. Not a terrible thing. Trust me, this is still a great cycle. And actually, Peter over on Co-op Cast liked this one better. But for me, it faded a little bit on multiple plays, whereas Dunwich has stayed strong for 4 like full playthroughs.
Gotcha.
Have you had a chance to engage with that part yet, Roy?
I saw the whole like doubt and conviction thing, and we were just playing off of how we felt for each thing. It's like, and we'd get a little bit of one and get a little bit of the other, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't got to the point where I know what the outcome of that is. So I wouldn't know like, oh, should I try to min-max this? Should I go on the crazy side, or should I go on the straight and narrow and be like, oh no, it's not all real? But I mean, as far as I've got in the game, it made it kind of interesting because, like, oh, am I going to be Mulder or am I going to be Scully? Who am I going to be?
That's great. That's a great analogy.
Great.
Suddenly I like it better. Never mind. It's not a con anymore. It's a mix now.
That's fantastic. I love it. You just rescued a point there with your X-Files reference.
There
That's
you
great.
go.
Yeah.
All right, what are we on? Number
1.
Number 1. Yeah, we're on the first one. Yeah, go for it.
So this is kind of a combo. A new mechanic that's introduced with Carcosa that I love is the hidden cards, which are generally these madness cards. So they go into your hand, and this card says this, you are not allowed to discuss them with the other players in any way. And they like restrict you from doing something. So it'll be like, you can't move. You can't play cards this turn, like that kind of thing. But in a cooperative game, it's so much fun because one of the things I love in the Arkham like horror mythos and in the Lovecraft stories is the idea of like untrustworthy allies and people losing their minds and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And this, to an extent, models that because like your friends will be like, "Hey man, come over here. I need you, man. Come over here." And you're not allowed to say, "I'm not allowed to move to you." You know, you're like, "I can't. No, man, I gotta stay here. I gotta investigate. This place is really important." You know, you kind of feel like you're getting into a role. No, I will say clearly it's not as interesting solo because then you don't have
that's
it.
what I was wondering about is like that just completely fades away and just becomes a restriction on you.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically it still works fine, so it's not like I'm feeling sad when I play solo and get those cards. But yeah, I mean, co-op, it's awesome, of course. And then the other thing that kind of goes along with that, as I had mentioned before, the theme of this one is fabulous. I would almost compare it, if you're a movie person like I am, if Dunwich Legacy is Aliens with an S at the end, then Carcosa is Alien. And what I mean by that is Aliens was like an action movie. In Dunwich, you're kind of like superheroes. You get like all these allies and you're like blasting gods with like your rifles. It's not that as hard as Carcosa. Carcosa is like a psychological thriller. Like you're never sure if you're like if what you're thinking of reality is true or not. The game really messes with your head. There's really disturbing things that happen, more so than even Dunwich Legacy. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how much these games ever scare me, but if I've ever been scared by an Arkham game, I came the closest with Path to Carcosa. Like it is awesome. It is the fullest realization of like a horror theme of any of the Arkham Files games from Fantasy Flight I've ever played, and I've played all of them. Whereas Dunwich, like I never felt that. I felt like I was awesome and I was kicking butt and taking names, but yeah, Carcosa I actually felt like freaked out at times, which is really cool.
I just love that the fact that there's so much narrative in these games, it gives them a real opportunity to like maybe make some really weird mind-bending stuff happen, you know?
Oh,
I mean, I even saw that even in the couple scenarios I played. It's like, oh, you did all these things, but then as you walk away, you look behind you and like, well, does this happen? Was it real or were you just all in your head? But what are you going to do after what you saw? Like, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Are you going to do this or that? Like, was it real or are you going to go in there and all these people you thought were evil, are you going to go and slaughter them because you actually thought they were evil, or are you actually going to like just be like, oh, you were insane the whole time?
Yeah,
are
you commit murder, was that a nursery? Or like, are you saving people? Like, oh, it's so good. It's so good.
And maybe you're the bad guy. I don't know. Like, if you make the choices, like what's going on? Are you just it gives you that feel of madness, which is kind of what you really want to like have come out of a Lovecraft game, you know, because it's so hard to emulate in pushing cardboard around, you know. But it's cool that the amount of narrative in the game makes that happen.
Yeah, it's got some very like, you know, if you're again a movie fan, like it's got like Memento style stuff going on a little bit. Like you're not even sure if like the hero is the hero or not. It's fantastic.
All right. So that actually, Roy, do you have any comments about your encounter with Carcosa? I mean, it sounds like Mike got you pumped up to play the rest of this.
Yeah. So I know I talked about it before, but I started playing this with one of my friends, and we only got through the first couple because it's like hard to stay together to play these sort of games. And it's like, then I was in this like quandary of like, well, he's got all the scenarios. Do I keep buying them myself? But if I don't buy them myself, then I don't have the cards to upgrade my character. And it just kind of like, messed me up. But I think I might start back over beginning and play through it, solo, even though I'll miss out those whole cards being hidden and playing it with other stuff. But I really want to get the packs myself as well so I can upgrade my deck in those little ways, which is really cool, just to have more new cards for the different classes as you go along.
Spend that money, Roy.
Hey, my strategy is always just after I've finished and beaten a scenario, then I'll buy the next one. And then after I've beaten that one, I'll buy the next one. I don't go out and like complete the entire set until like I'm completely done. So,
sure.
But you can do it slowly. And that's the cool thing about these cooperative games is like a lot of these LCG games, you can get left behind quick. Like Who's going to jump in
Yes.
Game of Thrones now? Or who's going to jump in some of these other things? Like even L5R has only been out for like a year, but it's like, how
Dude.
far behind are you
Yeah,
now? to start
exactly.
jumping?
Dude, Keyforge. We're behind on Keyforge. It came out yesterday.
Yeah, it's fine. No, I'm just kidding. But it's like with these cooperative games, it's not really like a meta or a thing that you're trying to fight. You can literally just buy the base set and start playing through the story, and you never have to like try to catch up to everything else. You can just, as you complete something, just get the next one that you want to play. Just as you feel like playing the next scenario, just play the next one and just slow roll it at your own pace instead of having to be like, I need to buy all the things. It's like, you're like, hey, I feel like playing the next scenario or finishing up this cycle. Let me play that. So I think it's cool the way the cooperative games work, because I felt the same way about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It wasn't the stress of being far behind everybody else. It's just play when you want to play.
All right, so we covered the Path of Carcosa. We covered the Dunwich Legacy over on Co-op Cast. I mean, as long as Mike keeps on buying packs, and as long as you guys tell us out in the audience that you're interested in hearing the further adventures of Arkham Horror, just to kind of like, voyeur style, keep track of it and see if you wanted to take the plunge or not. Let us know. Every night is game night. We have a Facebook group. We have the Twitter. You go over to One Stop Co-op Shop. Those are my guys over there, Colin and Steve and Elijah and Mike and Peter. Just hit us all up. Tell us what you want in terms of content, in terms of Arkham Horror, in terms of anything. Roy, thank you so much for helping us out. Thank you for filling in for my ignorance. I don't know about any of this stuff, but you really came through for us, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
And we could see you at Epic Gaming Night. That is a podcast. That is a YouTube video, right?
Yeah, I'm at Epic Gaming Night if you just search it on YouTube, and then I do a ton of stuff over on the Dice Tower as well, so check me out over there.
And you are going to hear from Mike more because he is part of the ENGN family at this point. Hopefully I'm part of the Co-op Cast family. We're just going to keep on working together, man.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Well, we've had you on at least 2 times now, right, Jason? So, yeah, you're always welcome, man.
All right. That is going to do it for an hour of Arkham, full of Arkham stuff. Thank you so much one more time to Luke, to Roy, and to Mike. It is over an hour. I don't like to let episodes get this long, so I'm just going to jump straight to the sign off. As Anthony would say, go ahead and grab a solo game off of that shelf, and let's make every night a game night.